The summer sun hammered down on Hanover Street like a blade wrapped in heat. Tourists scattered across the crosswalk in slow, careless patterns, their shopping bags swinging, their phones raised to catch the light bouncing off the brick buildings. The air smelled like grilled meat from a nearby restaurant, mixed with gasoline exhaust and the metallic scent of hot pavement baking under August. A little girl sat in a pink wheelchair. 5 years old. Small for her age, her legs thin and still beneath a yellow sundress printed with dancing elephants. Unicorn stickers covered the wheels, faded from months of sunlight, but still bright enough to catch the eye of anyone walking past. Her name was Emma Calabrese. She didn't know what that name meant yet. She only knew that her legs didn't work the way other children's legs worked, and that was simply how things were. She sat frozen on the corner of Hanover and Prince, waiting for the light to change, her small hand gripping the wheelchair's armrest. Her caregiver had stepped into a store 3 doors down. Just for a moment. Just to grab a coffee. That was when the sound came. Not the sound of a normal car. The sound of something heavy moving fast, an engine roaring like a wounded animal, tires screaming against asphalt as the driver yanked the wheel hard left. A black SUV with tinted windows jumped the curb 20 yards away and pointed itself directly at the child like a bullet aimed at a target. Everything that happened next took for seconds. A woman in faded blue scrubs, worn thin at the elbows, stained with things that wouldn't wash out, was walking past the pharmacy 3 storefronts away. Her name was Aria Hartley. 28 years old. Dark brown hair pulled back so tight her temples showed the strain. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they had learned long ago to look down, to not draw attention, to move through the world like a ghost. A ghost with calloused hands. A ghost who hadn't slept more than 4 hours in weeks. She heard the engine. She didn't think. Her body simply moved, the way a body moves when it recognizes danger before the mind catches up. 3 strides. Her work shoes, cheap sneakers purchased at a discount store, the rubber worn thin, pounded against the concrete. The SUV was 30 yards away. 20. The sound it made was like the world cracking open. Aria grabbed the wheelchair's handles and yanked with everything she had. The small wheel spun, the unicorn stickers catching light as the chair rolled backward, away from the curb, away from the street. Emma's head whipped back. She opened her mouth to cry out. The first bullet caught Aria in the shoulder. It didn't feel like pain at first. It felt like a hammer blow, like someone had swung a fist made of fire directly into the soft place where her neck met her collarbone. The impact spun her sideways, but her hands didn't let go of the wheelchair. She held on like the chair was the only real thing in a world that had just split into before and after. The second bullet tore through her ribs. The third found her abdomen. The fourth. The fifth. Blood bloomed across her scrubs like flowers opening in fast motion, the blue fabric turning dark and heavy. She collapsed forward over the wheelchair, her body folding like she was bowing, protecting the child underneath her the way a mother protects her young from a storm, the way the earth protects seeds underground, the way hands cup a candle flame against the wind. Emma screamed. A sound like breaking glass. Like the entire city was breaking. The SUV swerved. Tires shrieked. The driver had fired 5 shots. The target was supposed to die. The target was not supposed to have someone else throw themselves into the line of fire like they were made of nothing, like their body was just a shield, just a piece of meat to stop the bullets from reaching the girl. The vehicle accelerated and disappeared around the corner onto a side street, the engine sound fading into the summer heat and the screams of pedestrians and the sound of Emma crying, always Emma crying. 3 stories above, in a penthouse corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that swallowed the entire city, Nicholas Calabrese stood with binoculars pressed to his eyes. 42 years old. 6'2". His suit was charcoal grey, tailored in Italy by a man who had since retired. His hair was dark, greying at the temples in a way that made him look less like a man aging and more like a man being carved from stone. His face was sharp, cheekbones like blades, a jaw that looked like it had been designed to deliver orders that could not be refused. There was a scar running from his left eye down to his cheekbone, thin and precise, the work of a surgical blade, not an accident. He had been watching Emma. Always watching. She was his daughter. His only child. His reason for living after his brother had destroyed everything else. She had been taken from him at birth, paralyzed by something that happened during delivery, the doctors said, some complication they couldn't explain. She was his daughter and she could not walk and she could not run, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure nothing else was taken from her. He was watching through the binoculars when the woman threw herself in front of the bullets. The binoculars dropped from his hands. They fell the 15 feet to the marble floor and shattered, glass scattering across the white stone like 1,000 tiny diamonds. He heard the sound. He registered it. He didn't move. His two lieutenants, Vinny and Franco, men who had worked for him for 15 and 17 years respectively, moved toward him, but something in his stillness stopped them cold. They knew that stillness. They had seen it only twice before in their entire careers. Once was the night his brother disappeared. The other time was the morning he learned his wife had died giving birth to a child who would never walk. Boss. Franco's voice was careful, the way you speak to someone standing on the edge of a cliff. What happened? Nicholas didn't answer. His eyes were still fixed on the window, on the street below, on the place where a woman in blue scrubs was bleeding out onto hot pavement to protect a child she had never met. A stranger. Someone nobody. Someone with nothing. He watched as the paramedics arrived, as they lifted her onto a stretcher, as her body went limp like a puppet with its strings cut. He watched as they placed Emma gently into an ambulance, and even from 3 stories up he could hear the sound of her crying. He didn't know her name. He didn't know why she was there. He didn't know that she had been working a double shift at St. Mary's Elder Care Facility and had decided to walk through this neighborhood because it was 4 miles instead of 5, because she was counting steps the way other people counted money, because she was always trying to shave minutes and cents and breath away from her life to make room for survival. What he didn't know was that this woman, this ghost who ate other people's leftover meals and slept in a storage closet on a mattress she'd found in the trash, would become the person who saved not just his daughter's life, but something far more fragile. His ability to believe that there was still goodness in the world. That there were still people worth saving. That his brother's betrayal had not poisoned everything. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to 3 weeks before the shooting, to the night Aria Hartley had exactly $78 in her pocket and nowhere left to run. The bus station smelled like diesel fuel and defeat. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless, terrible song. It was 3 in the morning, and Aria sat on a plastic bench that was bolted to the floor, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee so weak it tasted like brown water. The coffee cost $2. She had calculated precisely how long she could stretch $78. Her left eye was swollen shut. The skin around it had turned colors that shouldn't exist in nature, purple bleeding into black, with sickly yellow at the edges where the swelling was beginning to fade from the impact a day and a half ago. Her throat bore 5 fingerprint bruises, dark and deliberate, the mark of hands that had wanted to squeeze until the breathing stopped. Her ribs ached in a way that suggested something might be cracked, but she didn't have money for x-rays, so she breathed carefully and tried not to move too much. His name was Douglas Hale. He had seemed normal at first, kind, even. Older than her by 14 years. Successful. He wore expensive watches and drove a car that cost more than her rent. They met at a restaurant where she worked evening shifts, and he had come in 3 nights in a row and ordered the same thing and left her cash tips that seemed impossibly large. $40. $50. One time, $100. When he asked her to dinner, she said yes because she was tired of being invisible and he was looking directly at her, and sometimes being looked at is all the attention a person needs to make a terrible decision. The first time he hit her was over something small. She had laughed at a joke his business partner made. A genuine laugh. Douglas said she was flirting. She said she wasn't. He said she was a liar. When she tried to walk away, he grabbed her throat and slammed her against the kitchen counter and squeezed until the world started to fade at the edges, until everything became small and far away, until breathing became a luxury instead of a guarantee. He apologized afterward. He cried. He said he loved her. He said it would never happen again. He gave her $400 and told her to buy something nice for herself. When nothing had changed, when the second time came even worse than the first, she didn't tell anyone. She simply started planning her escape with the precision of someone defusing a bomb. She had taken the cash he'd given her, the guilt money, the apology money, and hidden it in a false compartment in her car. She had been saving it for a week. When he went to a business meeting, she packed a single bag with clothes and her sister's medical records and a photograph of her dead husband, a man who had been good and kind and who had been taken from her by cancer 5 years earlier, leaving her with nothing but memories and a grave to visit on his birthday. She had taken what she could carry and she had driven to the bus station and she had bought a ticket to Providence and she had thrown her phone out the window on the highway so he couldn't track her location. 3 hours later, she was sitting in a bus station at 3 in the morning, calculating how long $78 could sustain her. The ticket was $42. That left $36 for food and shelter. In Providence, she had a friend from high school, someone she hadn't spoken to in 12 years but who had been kind once, and kindness seemed like something worth betting on. If her friend would let her stay for even a few days, maybe she could find work. Maybe she could figure out her next move. The bus wasn't leaving for another 4 hours. She closed her eyes, closed her one good eye, and tried to sleep, tried to make her body small, tried to disappear. What she didn't know was that Douglas had called her sister. What she didn't know was that her sister, desperate and terrified, had told him about a contact she had, someone connected to business people in Boston. What she didn't know was that by morning, there would be people looking for her. What she didn't know was that the city she was running toward was already being informed of her arrival, already being prepared for her capture. What she didn't know was that she had only 3 weeks left as a nobody. The fluorescent lights hummed above the hallway of Riverside Elder Care, that particular frequency that seemed to drain color from everything it touched. Aria Hartley pushed a cart laden with dinner trays, the smell of institutional mashed potatoes and overcooked chicken clinging to her clothes, her hair, her skin like a second identity she could not wash away. Mrs. Chen's room was at the end of the hall. She sat in her wheelchair facing the window, though the window only showed a parking lot and the grey November sky pressing down like a lid. "Dinner time, Mrs. Chen," Aria said, setting the tray down with practiced gentleness. Mrs. Chen did not turn around. She never turned around anymore. Aria looked at the untouched lunch plate from noon, the puddle of gravy congealing around mashed potatoes that had been warm once, 8 hours ago. She thought about waste. She thought about how much a person could hate waste when they had nothing. The green beans were still good, cold but firm. The dinner roll from the basket was from this morning's delivery. 3/4 of it remained. She waited until Mrs. Chen was absorbed in the television, some game show where people screamed about money they would never have, and then Aria did what she did every shift. She took the good food from the tray, opened the takeout container from her locker that sat in the break room, and scraped the mashed potatoes in. The beans. Half the roll. A plastic spoon. This was dinner. This was her dinner, 6 hours after her actual shift began at 6 in the morning, after 16 hours of moving between rooms, between bodies, between the endless needs of people whose names she learned but who never learned hers. The clock on the wall said 10:02 p.m. 13 minutes until her shift ended. 13 minutes until she could walk home through the dark streets of Boston's North End, past the restaurant with the warm light spilling out, past the expensive cars with the leather interiors, past the life that moved in a different dimension than her own. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. Her stomach seized. The message said, "Your sister called me. Said you won't answer anymore. Said you're sending all your money to a hospital in Ohio." That's very touching, Aria. Very selfless. When you're ready to talk about your future, you know how to reach me. Douglas Hale. Not a text from her sister's hospital. Not news about the surgery. It was him. It was always him now. Aria's hands trembled as she put the phone away. She finished her shift in a daze, clocking out at 11:51 p.m. exactly, watching the timestamp appear on the digital screen as if it proved she existed, as if being documented meant being real. The walk home took 23 minutes. She counted every block, every corner, every streetlight because counting things gave her the illusion of control. The November wind cut through her thin jacket, a jacket she had owned for 4 years, and the seams were starting to separate at the shoulders. She passed Calabrese's at 11:38 p.m. The restaurant was still open, warm light spilling across the sidewalk in a golden rectangle, expensive silhouettes moving behind glass, wine glasses catching the light, laughter that sounded like it belonged to people who never counted their money, who never calculated how many shifts remained between them and catastrophe. Aria did not slow down. She did not look inside. She did not know that on that night, Nicholas Calabrese sat at a private table in the back room, reviewing numbers with 2 men named Vinny and Franco, men who had been beside him for 15 years and who knew the weight of his moods by the way he held his water glass. She did not know that in 5 days, blood would stain that same sidewalk. 3 days earlier than this night, everything had been slightly different. Aria had received a phone call from her sister's hospital in Ohio. The experimental treatment that might buy time, might extend life, might give her sister even 6 more months of being alive rather than dissolving slowly into the cancer that was eating her from the inside. That treatment required a commitment. $200,000 across 6 months, or they would not even begin. Aria's sister had found a program that would help if Aria could somehow come up with the first payment. $125,000 in 3 days. By Friday. A number so enormous it was almost abstract, like being asked to buy the moon. Aria had sat on the bus station bench and done the mathematics on her phone. 6 months of working double shifts. $800 per month after taxes, after rent, after her insurance and her phone bill. That meant she would need nearly 16 years to accumulate $125,000. By then her sister would have been dead for 15 years. That was when the thought began to form, not consciously but as a shape in the darkness, an image without words. There had to be another way. There had to be something she could do besides watch the clock and count the money and wait for time to steal everything. The next afternoon, she took a different route through the financial district. The weather had shifted. The cold had broken for 1 day, and the sun pressed down warm and almost unkind on the sidewalk. She had spent her last $20 on groceries, eggs, bread, a rotisserie chicken that was marked down because today was its last day of sale. She was walking past the intersection of Congress and Hanover, heading toward the bus stop, when she heard the sound. Not loud but wrong. Brakes without squealing. A truck reversing without the alarm that trucks usually had. A pink wheelchair sat in the middle of the street. The child inside it was reaching for something, her brown curls bouncing as she leaned forward, tiny fingers grasping at a doll that had rolled beneath the truck's front wheel. Pink plastic. One arm bent upward in a permanent wave. The truck did not stop reversing. The driver did not see her. Aria could see this with absolute clarity, the way the truck kept moving backward, the way the child did not look up, the way a second and then another second passed and nothing happened except physics, except gravity, except the mathematics of mass and momentum that did not care about pink dolls or brown curls. Aria dropped the groceries. The plastic bag burst against the sidewalk. Egg shattered. Bread tumbled out and rolled in 3 directions. She ran 4 steps and grabbed the back of the wheelchair, both hands on the rubber handles, and pulled backward with everything her tired body contained. The wheelchair lurched. The child looked up, surprised, her mouth forming a small O. The truck roared past. The wind from it knocked Aria sideways. She stumbled. She did not fall. They both remained on the sidewalk, the child and Aria, and for 2 seconds neither of them breathed. The little girl looked up at Aria with eyes the color of dark honey and said, "You saved me. What is your name?" Aria's own voice sounded far away, someone else's voice. "I am Aria." 2 men in black suits emerged from the crowd that had frozen at the moment of impact. They moved with purpose and without panic, the way people move when they have trained for this exact moment. One spoke rapidly into a radio that was attached to his collar. "We have visual confirmation. The girl is safe. We have the civilian now." They took Emma gently. One of the men, Vinny, though Aria did not know his name, bent down and looked at the child's face, her hands, checking for injury the way you would check a precious object for damage. "You are okay, Emma." "The lady saved me," Emma said, pointing at Aria with absolute certainty. Vinny stood. He looked at Aria for a moment, and in that moment his eyes held something complicated. Gratitude, yes. But also assessment. And beneath that, the beginning of a question that would unfold across the next 3 weeks like a map. "What is your name?" he asked. "Aria Hartley." He nodded and spoke into his collar. "Civilian is Aria Hartley." She pulled the girl back from the truck. "No ID requested. Boss needs to know immediately." The radio crackled. A voice, deep, commanding, a voice like the sound of a door closing, said simply, "Bring her." But Vinny was kind. Or perhaps protocol dictated it. He gestured to her scattered groceries, now ruined on the concrete. "We will buy you new food. Come." Aria picked up the doll from beneath the truck, where it still lay, still waving. She handed it to Emma, who clutched it against her chest as if it might disappear. "I cannot," Aria heard herself saying. "I have work." "You do not have work anymore," Vinny said. It was not unkind. It was simply fact. You saved Nicholas Calabrese's daughter. Now you are seen. Now you matter. And the boss does not forget. 3 days later, Douglas Hale found her in the stairwell of her apartment building. His hands were already formed into fists. 3 days later, Douglas Hale found her in the stairwell of her apartment building. His hands were already formed into fists. He stood between her and the 4th-floor landing, blocking the light from the window. 6'2", shoulders broad from his college quarterback days, now wearing a $3,000 suit that could not hide the ugliness beneath it. His face had gone red the way it always did before the violence came. "Baby, we need to talk," he said. His voice was gentle. This was the most dangerous version of Douglas, the one who pretended gentleness was possible between them. Aria turned to run back down the stairs. Her grocery bag, 2 cans of beans, a carton of milk, a half loaf of bread, swung against her hip. But Douglas moved faster. He grabbed her left arm just above the elbow, and his fingers sank into her flesh like a blade sinking into fruit. "You think you can just leave me?" His grip tightened. "After everything I did for you? Everything I gave you?" She pulled hard. The grocery bag tore. Cans rolled down the stairs, clattering like gunshots in the silence of the stairwell. She ran. Down 4 flights, her breath coming in gasps, her lungs burning. Behind her, his footsteps, measured, unhurried, absolutely certain he would catch her. She burst through the lobby door into the street. October rain was falling, turning the sidewalk into a mirror of the gray sky above. She ran toward the busier street 2 blocks away, where people moved under umbrellas, where there were witnesses. Behind her, his Mercedes pulled up alongside, crawling beside her like a predator matching its prey's speed. The window rolled down. Douglas leaned across the passenger seat, his face twisted. "I know where you work, Aria. Riverside Elder Care. 10 p.m., you come out the back door by the loading dock. I know where you sleep. I know your sister's phone number in Ohio. The cops won't help you. My uncle is Captain Hale, remember? He and I had coffee this morning. He thinks you're unstable. He thinks you're making things up." She cut left, into the fluorescent brightness of a 24-hour diner. The door chimed as she entered. Warmth hit her face, the smell of coffee and burnt bacon grease and something deeper, something like safety. She ran to the bathroom in the back, locked herself inside, and collapsed against the door. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone. 911, she pressed the button. Emergency services, what is your location? Mendez Diner, corner of Hanover and Salem. My ex-boyfriend is outside. He's following me. He grabbed my arm. He threatened me and my sister. Static. Then a woman's voice, bored in a way that suggested she had heard this call 1,000 times before. This is a domestic issue. Have you tried talking to him? Sometimes these situations resolve themselves when both parties communicate their feelings. He's outside right now. I'm locked in the bathroom. Has he threatened to kill you specifically? He said he knows where I work, where I sleep. That's not a direct threat of death. We can send an officer by, but I'd encourage you to consider couples counseling. A lot of relationships go through rough patches. The line went dead. Or felt like it did. Aria sat on the tile floor of that bathroom for 3 hours and 42 minutes. She knew this because she watched the clock above the sink. The second hand moved like it was pushing through water. At 3:17 a.m., she cracked the door open. The diner was nearly empty. Douglas was gone. But his message had been left behind in her mind like a stain that would not wash out. The next evening came dark and cold. Rain fell in sheets from a sky the color of a bruise. Aria worked her shift at Riverside Elder Care, lifting patients from beds to wheelchairs, checking blood pressure, wiping mouths, speaking gently to people who no longer recognized their own names. At 11 p.m., she changed out of her scrubs in the locker room. Her name tag came off. Aria Hartley, CNA. $15 per hour. That was what her labor was worth. She made it to the alley behind her apartment building because she was careless. Because 3 hours of fear had exhausted her into a kind of numb stupidity. Because she thought maybe he had given up. He had not given up. He was waiting in the darkness between the dumpster and the brick wall. He grabbed her from behind, his forearm around her throat, and slammed her head against the brick. Once. Twice. Stars exploded behind her eyes. She tasted blood, her own, bright and metal-sharp on her tongue. She tried to scream. His arm tightened. The world went purple at the edges. You embarrass me, he whispered against her ear. You made me look weak. Nobody leaves Douglas Hale. She stomped on his instep. He cursed and loosened his grip for half a second. Half a second was all she needed. Her knee came up hard. He doubled over, gasping. She ran. Her vision was already swelling shut, one eye closing like a door being slowly pulled closed. Her throat felt crushed, the muscles screaming. She ran with her hand pressed to her throat as if that could hold the damage inside. 3 blocks away, her legs gave out. She collapsed against a restaurant wall, the brick still warm from the day's heat. Blood dripped from her split lip onto her torn scrubs, dark spots that looked almost like flowers. The sign above read Calabrese in gold letters. She didn't know what that meant. She only knew she was alone, and the night was full of rain, and her sister was dying in Ohio without the money that had just arrived in her bank account. She slid down the brick wall to the wet cobblestones. Her vision blurred. The pain in her ribs suggested something was broken. Above her, a security camera mounted on the corner of the building pointed down at the street, its red light glowing like an eye. Inside, on the 3rd floor, in an office surrounded by leather and dark wood and the smell of expensive cigars, Nicholas Calabrese watched the monitors with the attention of a man who understood that violence was a language that never stopped speaking. He saw the woman collapse. He saw her face lift to the rain. He saw her, unmistakably, impossibly, the woman from 3 days ago. The one who had thrown herself in front of a truck for a child she'd never met. The one whose name he had learned was Aria Hartley. The one who now sat broken on his doorstep like a message from the universe. He pressed the intercom button. His voice came out steady, controlled, like a man giving a simple order about dinner reservations. Vinny. Franco. There is a woman outside. Bring her in. Now. The rain intensified. Thunder moved across the sky like a warning that everything was about to change. Neither of them knew it yet, but the moment Aria Hartley sat down on those wet cobblestones, she had crossed an invisible line. She had entered a world where loyalty meant everything and mercy was a currency more valuable than money. She had become seen. And Nicholas Calabrese did not forget. The summer thunderstorm moved across Boston like a predator closing in. The air had turned thick and muggy, pressing down on the city with the weight of something alive. Inside Calabrese's restaurant on Hanover Street, the private booth sat in candlelight, isolated from the noise of the main dining room by dark wood paneling and a single security door. White tablecloth stretched across the table. The smell of garlic and basil and expensive wine hung in the still air. Aria Hartley sat across from Nicholas Calabrese, and for the first time in her life, someone was looking at her like she mattered. "Emma's birthday is in 3 weeks," Nicholas said, his voice like warm stone. He had ordered her favorite, mushroom risotto with truffle oil. The plate gleamed under the soft light. "She wants to learn to paint. I told her that if anyone could teach her, it would be you." Aria picked at the risotto with her fork. 2 weeks had passed since that night on the cobblestones. 2 weeks of sleeping in a guest room on the penthouse's 3rd floor. 2 weeks of helping Emma with her therapy, braiding the girl's dark hair, reading her bedtime stories. 2 weeks of Nicholas watching her the way a man watches something he's afraid might disappear. "I've never taught anyone anything," Aria said quietly. "I've been a waitress, a maid, a home health aide. I've never had a skill to pass on." "You have the most important one," he replied. The candlelight caught the edge of the scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone. "You know how to survive. You know how to care for someone even when you have nothing left to give. Emma needs to learn that." He paused. "I need you to understand what I'm offering. Not protection. Not charity. A real position. Managing the Calabrese Foundation. We do genuine work, scholarships, medical assistance, women's shelters. You would run it. You would decide where the money goes. You would be free." Outside, the first sheet of lightning split the sky in half. The thunder that followed sounded like the ceiling breaking. Aria looked at him, really looked at him. At the expensive suit that cost more than she'd made in 6 months. At the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist that cost more than a new car. At the way he sat beside her like he was listening to something sacred. She thought about that moment 3 days ago when he'd pulled her off the wet cobblestones, when his men had carried her inside, when he'd sat across from her hospital bed and asked her name like it mattered. "Why?" she asked. "Why any of this? I'm nobody to you. I was just a woman in the wrong place." "Because the people who did that to you believed you were nobody," Nicholas said, and his voice had gone cold, sharp like a blade. "And I needed to know if you believed it too." The front door of the restaurant burst open. Douglas Hale stood framed in the entrance, soaked through from the downpour outside, his eyes wild and unfocused. The gun hung from his right hand like something natural. Rain streamed down his face. His suit was torn at the shoulder. He looked like a man who had been drowning and clawed his way back to shore. "Aria!" His scream cut through the restaurant. Diners froze mid-conversation. A woman dropped her wine glass. "Get away from him. You're mine." The entire restaurant went still. That terrible silence where you can hear the rain drumming against the windows, hear the crackle of the candles, hear your own heartbeat. Nicholas rose slowly. He moved like a man soothing a wounded animal, deliberate and calm. Vinny and Franco emerged from the shadows near the kitchen, their movements economical and precise. But Douglas raised the gun, and his hand shook like someone with a fever. The barrel swung toward the ceiling. The gunshot came first, a crack that seemed to split the world open. Plaster rained down from the decorative ceiling. Then the screaming started. Customers scrambled over tables. A woman in a silk dress ran toward the exit, her heels skittering on the tile floor. A server dropped a tray of glasses that shattered in a crystalline cascade. "Don't!" Nicholas's voice cut through everything. He stepped around the table, positioning himself between Douglas and Aria. He was taller by 4 inches and broader through the shoulders, and he wore his violence like other men wore confidence. "You need to leave. Now. While I still allow it." Douglas laughed, a high, fractured sound like something breaking inside his chest. "You don't tell me what to do. She's mine. She belongs to me. And that little crippled daughter of yours? Maybe I'll pay her a visit. See how tough you are when I—" He didn't finish. Nicholas's expression didn't change. It simply emptied. The warmth drained from his eyes like water from a broken cup, leaving only something cold and ancient. Aria had heard the stories about Nicholas Calabrese, about how he'd chosen his empire over his own blood, about how he'd handed his betraying brother to enemies like a sacrifice on an altar. She was seeing it now, the thing inside him that made men follow him into darkness without question. "You just threatened my daughter," Nicholas said, his voice smooth and terrible like oil spreading across water. "You have 10 seconds to run. You will not make it, but you should try." Douglas's courage evaporated. He backed toward the door, the gun still raised but his hands trembling so badly the barrel wove through the air like something alive. Vinny and Franco didn't move. They didn't need to. In that moment, they understood that something had shifted in Nicholas Calabrese, something fundamental. A line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Nicholas pulled a phone from his jacket. He pressed a single number. "It's time," he said, and hung up. Douglas hit the front door at a run, water streaming behind him as he plunged back into the storm. Aria saw him for a second in the streetlight outside, shoulders hunched, feet splashing through puddles, and then he was gone into the rain-soaked night. Aria heard the screaming maybe 30 seconds later. Raw, primal, the sound of a man understanding that he'd made a terrible mistake. It came from somewhere near the alley, muffled by the storm and distance but unmistakable. The sound cut off abruptly, replaced by the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Inside the restaurant, no one moved. The candles burned. The plates of expensive food sat untouched. Nicholas returned to the booth and sat down across from Aria like nothing had happened. He picked up his wine glass and drank. "The Moretti family has waited 5 years for leverage," he said, his voice even and matter-of-fact. "Douglas Hale just became the most valuable currency I possessed. I gave him to them. They will make sure he understands that threatening my child was the last decision he will ever make." Aria sat very still. The handprint bruises on her throat were fading to pale yellow. The ribs that had been broken in 3 places were healing. She thought about the night she'd fled Douglas's apartment, about the way his hands felt around her neck, about the small apartment in Medford where she'd cowered in the dark with her phone hidden from him, calling the police over and over while they ignored her. "You killed him," she whispered. "No," Nicholas said. His eyes found hers across the candlelit table. "I gave him to people who will ensure he wishes for death every single day for the rest of his life. That is mercy, compared to what I would do." He threatened Emma. "There are lines you do not cross." He crossed them. Now he lives in the consequences. Aria should have felt horror. She should have felt revulsion or fear or the need to flee. Instead, she felt something breaking open inside her chest like ice cracking in spring. She felt free. For the first time since Douglas Hale had taught her what a man's hands could do, she felt free. The next morning, the sun rose on a city washed clean by rain. 3 blocks away, at the Four Seasons Hotel on Arlington Street, Diana Whitfield stood at the marble podium in a private dining room and surveyed her kingdom. 50 of Boston's wealthiest women sat in gilt chairs, their pearls gleaming, their attention focused entirely on her. She was 63 years old, with blonde hair maintained at tremendous expense and a face that had been lifted so many times it had taken on a permanent expression of surprise. She wore a Chanel suit that cost $8,000. Integrity, she was saying, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity, is the foundation of true philanthropy. When we give, we must give from a place of. The doors opened. 2 men in dark suits entered. Federal agents, their bearing unmistakable. Behind them came a third man with a briefing folder thick as a Bible. The room went silent. Several women looked at each other. Diana's smile froze on her face. "Diana Whitfield," the senior agent said, stepping forward. His voice had the flat, ceremonial tone of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. "You are under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit assault and battery. You have the right to remain silent." The words continued, but Diana wasn't hearing them. She was watching as Vinny and Franco stepped forward with a stack of documents. Photographs. Bank statements. Transaction records stretching back 7 years. Proof that the Whitfield Foundation had funneled charity donations through shell corporations and back into her personal accounts. Proof that money meant for battered women's shelters had been diverted to cover her daughter's private school tuition. Proof that she'd known exactly what Douglas Hale was doing to Aria, had actively hidden it, and had benefited from the violence. "You can't do this," Diana said, and her voice had gone thin and reedy. "I know people. I know judges. My lawyer will have me out by federal mandate," the agent interrupted. "Your lawyer has already been notified. The United States Attorney's Office has frozen your assets pending trial. We estimate charges will carry a minimum 40-year sentence." Diana's face went white. One of her friends, Margaret Chen, who had eaten brunch with her every Thursday for 12 years, stood up and walked out of the room without looking back. Then another woman left. Then another. By the time they led Diana away in handcuffs, her empire of charity and influence was crumbling like a building whose foundation had been dynamite all along. The cameras flashed outside the hotel. By evening, every news outlet in Boston was running the story. By the next morning, national outlets had picked it up. By the end of the week, Diana Whitfield's face was synonymous with corruption and cruelty. The foundation she'd built was seized. Her home was seized. Her bank accounts were frozen. Aria Hartley watched it all on the television in the penthouse while Emma painted at the dining room table, her small paralyzed hand guided by a special brace that Nicholas had commissioned. The girl was creating something beautiful, swirls of blue and gold that looked like lightning, like storms breaking apart into light. "Vivi!" Emma called, using her shortened version of Aria's name. "Come see." Aria came and stood beside her. The painting was magnificent. Storms transforming into something bright. "What does it mean?" Emma asked. Her dark eyes, so much like her father's, waited for an answer. Aria knelt beside the girl's chair and took her small hand very gently. The paralysis had stolen so much from Emma, but it hadn't stolen her ability to see the world as a place of transformation and beauty. "It means," Aria said softly, "that storms always pass. And when they do, we're still here. Still strong. Still capable of painting something beautiful." Emma smiled and returned to her canvas. Outside, the summer sun beat down on Boston. Somewhere in the shadows of the federal building, Diana Whitfield was understanding that her influence had evaporated overnight. Somewhere in the dark places of the city, Douglas Hale was being reminded minute by minute that violence echoes forward forever. But here, in the penthouse above Calabrese's restaurant, there was only sunlight and the smell of paint and a child creating beauty in the aftermath of everything breaking. 1 year had passed since the rain fell on Boston that summer night. 1 year since Douglas Hale disappeared into the federal building, screaming. 1 year since Diana Whitfield's name became synonymous with corruption and cruelty. 1 year since Aria Hartley stood in an alley with blood on her dress and believed her life was over. Now she stands at the floor-to-ceiling windows of a penthouse on the 42nd floor, watching rain streak the glass again. The storm moves across the city like a living thing, clouds pressing down low and dark, lightning splitting the sky into pieces. She is not afraid of storms anymore. Her reflection in the window shows a woman transformed. The bruises are gone. Her hair, long and healthy now, falls past her shoulders in waves the color of chestnuts. The tailored gray suit she wears costs more than everything she owned a year ago, but she doesn't wear it to prove anything. She wears it because she earned it. The Hartley Foundation for Domestic Violence Survivors has raised $3,412,000. She has saved 47 lives from situations exactly like hers. 47 people who had nothing left but $53 and a suitcase and a prayer that didn't work. She gave them something better. She gave them a name. A choice. A way out. Her bank account shows $47,000. Money she earned. Money that belongs to her. The number still feels impossible when she checks it, like a mathematical error that might correct itself if she looks away and looks back. Behind her, the door opens. The sound is soft. She knows these footsteps. She has heard them at 3 in the morning when he checks the building's perimeter. She has heard them at dawn when he comes to watch her sleep, standing in the doorway like a man witnessing something sacred. She doesn't turn. She doesn't need to. Nicholas Calabrese crosses the room. His silhouette fills the space between her and the light, 6'1", shoulders broad enough to block out the world, a man built from shadows and expensive fabric and the kind of power that doesn't announce itself. Tonight he wears black. His cashmere coat, the one that costs more than a year of her old rent, hangs open over a charcoal shirt. The scar running from his eye to his cheekbone catches the lightning flash, silver white and perfect, a map of everything he's survived. He stands beside her at the window. They watch the rain together without speaking. The silence is not empty. It is full of a year's worth of small mornings, quiet dinners with Emma, his hand on her back in crowded restaurants, the way he learns her favorite coffee order and has it waiting every morning at exactly 6:11. It is full of the moment he taught Emma to paint, guiding the girl's paralyzed hand with such tenderness that Aria had to leave the room because her heart couldn't hold so much love. The rain intensifies. Thunder rolls across the rooftops. Finally, he speaks. His voice is deep and solid like an oath. I need to tell you something I have carried for a year. She turns. His face is unguarded in a way she has only seen when he is with Emma or when he reads bedtime stories to her, his powerful voice becoming gentle, becoming human. She has watched this man order executions with less emotion than he shows when Emma's hand trembles from the pain of physical therapy. When my brother Marco betrayed the family, he says, he did not just sell our secrets. He sold our trust. He taught me that caring about people was weakness. That mercy would get me killed. I became the man who chose survival over everything else. I stopped feeling. For 5 years, I was ice. Stone. A perfectly programmed machine. And then you threw yourself in front of a delivery truck for my daughter. A girl you did not know. A child whose father was nobody to you but a dangerous man in an expensive coat. He stops. Turns to face her fully. The lightning illuminates his eyes and they are burning. You took bullets for her. 5 of them. You almost died protecting someone who wasn't your blood. And I understood something that night in the hospital, standing over you with 27 stitches running down your ribs and a collapsed lung and watching you refuse painkillers because you wanted to be awake when Emma woke up. I understood that Marco had stolen something from me that I thought was gone forever, the belief that some people are worth saving. Worth choosing. Worth the risk. His hand reaches up, touches her face. His fingers are rough with calluses but his touch is gentle like a prayer. You taught me that again, he continues. You taught me that survival is not the same as living. That protecting someone is not weakness, it is the only thing that matters. I love you, Aria Hartley. I have loved you since the morning I watched you sit in the hospital waiting room with $47 in your wallet and a determination to work 3 jobs to pay for your sister's surgery. I have loved you every single day since. I just needed you to be free first. Free from him. Free from fear. Free to choose this, to choose me, because you want to, not because you need to. Aria's eyes fill. The tears come without warning, like the rain outside, like something that has been building for a year and finally releases. She steps closer, close enough that she can smell his cologne and the rain and something that is just him. She touches the scar along his jaw, traces it with her fingertips, remembers the story of how he got it. Remembers that he chose to keep it instead of having it removed. Some scars, he told her, are reminders that we survived. I choose you, she says, and her voice is trembling like a candle in the wind. I chose you the moment you knelt beside that couch and looked at me like I was worth saving. You gave me my life back, Nicholas. You gave me Hannah's life. You gave me everything. I love you. I have loved you in silence for months. I love you so much that sometimes I cannot breathe. He kisses her as lightning cracks across the Boston skyline, the storm raging outside and inside. Finally, there is peace. 3 months later, Emma's 6th birthday party fills the penthouse with color and laughter and the smell of vanilla cake. The girl sits in her pink wheelchair, the special mechanical brace Nicholas commissioned, allowing her to paint and write and create despite the paralysis that doctors said would never improve. But doctors did not account for a father who would move mountains, who would commission specialists from 3 continents, who now sits beside his daughter every evening and helps her hands move across canvas in the shapes of her imagination. She is painting storm clouds that transform into birds. Hannah stands beside her sister, healthy and glowing, her remission confirmed for 6 consecutive months. The medical bills are paid. The bankruptcy petition was withdrawn. She has color in her cheeks and light in her eyes, and she wears a dress that is not from a thrift store but from an actual boutique, chosen because she liked it, not because it was the cheapest option available. Vinny and Franco stand guard by the door, but they are smiling. Franco is eating cake. Vinny laughs at something Emma says, a real laugh that echoes across the room. These men have worked for Nicholas Calabrese for 17 years. They have seen him order violence with the efficiency of a man processing paperwork. They have never seen him like this, a father who teaches his daughter sign language so she can communicate in every possible way, a man who cries when Emma calls him daddy without her hand shaking from fear. Nicholas watches his family. Because that is what they are now. Not blood. Something stronger. Something built from broken pieces and second chances and the willingness to reach down into darkness and pull someone into light. Aria brings the cake to the center of the table. It is decorated with clouds and lightning and little sugar birds, and Emma squeals with delight. The candles flicker. She leans forward, guided by both her parents' hands, and blows them out with effort and determination and absolute joy. The room erupts in applause. Later, when the guests have left and Emma sleeps in her room down the hall, Aria and Nicholas step onto the balcony. The rain has stopped. The storm has passed. The sky is clearing, stars emerging like promises being kept. She rests her head against his chest and listens to his heartbeat. It is strong and steady and alive. He rests his chin on her head and speaks into her hair. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for choosing me first," she says. The rain begins again, gentle now, not violent. Healing rain. The kind that nourishes rather than destroys. And in the city below, in the federal building, Douglas Hale sits in a cell that is 6 feet by 8 feet, understanding minute by minute that violence echoes forward forever. In a courthouse, Diana Whitfield's legacy is being dismantled by lawyers and judges and the relentless march of justice. Their names are forgotten. Their cruelty has become their footnote. But here, on a balcony 42 stories above Boston, there is only the sound of rain and 2 people who survived everything and chose each other anyway. If this story moved your heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe for more stories of survival, justice, and second chances. Drop a comment telling us, what would you do if you had nothing left but $78 and a prayer? New story drops tomorrow. Do not miss it. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, joy, and days filled with peace and happiness. No matter how hard life gets, remember this, the storm will pass, and you are far stronger than you think. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.